Gail took a deep breath as she and Jasmine moved through the bustling airport, the warmth of Jamaica still lingering on their skin. The trip had been a bittersweet journey, reconnecting with roots and revisiting cherished family memories. Now, with their bags filled with mementos and hearts heavy with nostalgia, they prepared for the flight back to London. "Mom, it looks like we're not seated together," Jasmine said, glancing at their boarding passes with a furrowed brow. "You're in 14C and I'm back in 18D. Gail smiled softly, masking her disappointment. "It's all right, dear. It's only a few hours. We'll be in London before you know it, and then we can laugh about this too." Inwardly, she had hoped to share the flight with Jasmine, absorbing the last moments of their journey together. As they made their way through security, the efficiency of the process couldn't erase the warmth of the Caribbean sun or the echoes of Jamaica's vibrant streets. The stark contrast between the island's relaxed rhythms and the airport's sterile corridors was a constant reminder of the precious time they were leaving behind. Finally, boarding the plane, Gail navigated the narrow aisle with a practiced ease. Her seat was on the aisle, practical given her slight mobility issues. Jasmine, just a few rows back, exchanged a reassuring glance with her mother before pointing to her seat. Gail nodded, placing her carry-on in the overhead compartment and sitting down, her handbag with her phone and a book on her lap. As the seats around her filled quickly, she smiled at a young couple across the aisle, sharing a moment of understanding as they wrestled with their luggage. Just as she was about to lean back and dive into her book, a shadow loomed over her. Looking up, she saw a man standing next to her, his expression clouded with impatience. "Excuse me," he said curtly, indicating he needed to get to the window seat. "Of course," Gail replied evenly, masking her surprise at his brusqueness. Rising, she felt the familiar protest of her knees, a small reminder of her age. As she steadied herself, the man sighed audibly, his body language radiating annoyance. Gail's heart sank a little. Once seated again, she tried to shake off the discomfort. Outside, the setting sun cast a golden glow through the airplane windows, bathing the cabin in a soft, warm light, a stark contrast to the cold interaction she had just experienced. Eric, now identified by his boarding pass, took the window seat beside her. As the plane doors closed and the passengers settled in, the buzz of activity started to quiet down. Gail took a deep breath, trying to immerse herself in her book. Next to her, Eric was visibly unsettled, fidgeting in his seat. "Is everything all right?" Gail asked softly, hoping to ease the tension. Eric glared at her, his eyes narrowing. "I'd be better if I wasn't stuck here," he muttered. Gail's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "It's only a few hours. We'll be in London soon." Eric's response was a low, bitter scoff. "Yeah, well, some of us don't have the luxury of being comfortable next to certain people." Gail felt a sharp sting of hurt, but she took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "Everyone has the right to sit where they are assigned," she said quietly, turning back to her book. Jasmine, a few rows back, noticed the exchange. She could see the discomfort on her mother's face and the hostile body language of the man next to her. Leaning forward in her seat, she caught her mother's eye, silently asking if she was okay. Gail gave a small nod, but Jasmine remained on alert. As the plane taxied to the runway, Eric's muttering grew louder, his words laced with disdain. "They really should think about who they seat people next to. Some of us have standards." Gail closed her eyes briefly, willing herself to stay calm. "We all have to make the best of our situations," she replied, her voice calm but firm. Eric's eyes flashed with anger. "People like you always think you can just walk into any space and make everyone else uncomfortable," he snapped. The words hit Gail like a physical blow. She clenched her hands around her book, her knuckles white. "I'm just here to travel, same as you," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. A flight attendant passing by noticed the exchange and paused. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, looking between Gail and Eric. Eric turned to the flight attendant, his expression hardening. "I'm just expressing my discomfort," he said, his tone condescending. "I'd appreciate if someone actually cared about that." The flight attendant gave a tight smile. "Sir, we need to ensure all passengers are comfortable. Please refrain from making any more comments that could be seen as offensive." Eric glared at her, but said nothing more. The flight attendant gave Gail a reassuring nod before moving on. Gail sighed in relief, but felt the tension in the air thickening. Jasmine watched closely, her protective instincts on high alert. She could see her mother's subtle signs of distress and knew that this was not an isolated incident. The years of facing such prejudice had taught them both to navigate these waters, but it never got easier. As the plane took off, Gail stared out the window, the soft glow of the setting sun doing little to warm the cold interaction she had just endured. As the plane leveled off and the fasten seatbelt sign dimmed, the tension between Gail and Eric was palpable. Gail focused on her book, trying to ignore the seething man beside her. Jasmine, a few rows back, kept a watchful eye on her mother, her worry growing with each passing minute. Eric's muttering had not ceased. He shifted in his seat, glaring at Gail intermittently. "Unbelievable," he grumbled loudly. "Stuck next to someone like this." Jasmine's patience wore thin. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, making her way down the aisle. She leaned down to her mother, her voice low but firm. "Mum, is everything okay?" Gail looked up, her eyes tired but composed. "I'm fine, dear. Just trying to read." Jasmine straightened, turning her gaze to Eric. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone sharp. Eric looked up at Jasmine, his eyes narrowing. "I don't need to explain myself to you," he snapped. "Just go back to your seat." Jasmine's eyes flashed with anger. "I will not sit back while you disrespect my mother. She has every right to be here, just like you." Their exchange drew the attention of nearby passengers. Whispers spread through the cabin, and heads turned to watch the unfolding drama. A flight attendant hurried over, her expression concerned. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" she asked. Jasmine crossed her arms, standing her ground. "This man has been making racist remarks towards my mother since we boarded. It's unacceptable." The flight attendant's face tightened with professionalism. She looked at Eric, who scowled in response. "I was just expressing my discomfort. I have a right to do that." "Not if it involves harassing another passenger," the flight attendant said firmly. "Please lower your voice and remain respectful." Eric's face reddened with anger. "This is ridiculous. I shouldn't have to sit next to someone who makes me uncomfortable." Jasmine took a step closer to Eric, her voice low but steady. "The only person causing discomfort here is you. We all deserve to travel in peace." The flight attendant placed a gentle hand on Jasmine's arm. "Please, miss, let's try to de-escalate this situation. Everyone, please return to your seats." A middle-aged woman across the aisle, who had been watching intently, spoke up. "She's right. We've all heard what he's been saying. It's not okay." Another passenger, a young man a few rows back, nodded. "Yeah, we're all just trying to get to our destination. No need for this kind of behavior." The support from the other passengers bolstered Jasmine's resolve. She turned to the flight attendant. "We're not moving," He needs to stop. The flight attendant nodded, her expression resolute. I'll speak with the captain about this. Please, everyone, remain calm. As the flight attendant walked away, the tension in the cabin hung heavy in the air. Gail reached out and squeezed Jasmine's hand. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of gratitude and fear. Jasmine squeezed back, her eyes never leaving Eric. We're not alone, Mom. People see what's happening. Eric glared at them both, but the murmurs of support from other passengers seemed to dampen his bravado. He slumped back in his seat, muttering under his breath, but no longer loud enough for others to hear. The flight attendant returned shortly, accompanied by another crew member. Sir, she addressed Eric, if you continue to disturb the peace, we will have to take further action. This is your final warning. Eric's eyes flashed with indignation, but he remained silent. The flight attendants gave a nod to Gail and Jasmine before moving back to their stations. Jasmine settled back into her seat, her eyes still on her mother. Gail, though visibly shaken, gave her daughter a small, reassuring smile. The rest of the flight passed with an uneasy truce. Passengers occasionally glanced in their direction, but the confrontation had shifted something in the air. There was a sense of solidarity, a collective understanding that such behavior would not be tolerated. As they began their descent into London, Gail looked out the window, the city's lights twinkling below. She felt a mix of relief and exhaustion, grateful for her daughter's strength and the support of strangers who stood up against prejudice. As the plane cruised through the skies, the tension in the cabin thickened. Passengers exchanged worried glances, the earlier confrontation between Jasmine and Eric still fresh in their minds. Gail sat stiffly, her eyes fixed on the book in her lap, but the words blurred as her mind raced. Jasmine kept glancing back, ready to leap to her mother's defense again if needed. Eric's muttering grew louder once more, emboldened by the passing time. "This is ridiculous," he hissed, his voice carrying over the low hum of the engines. "I shouldn't have to put up with this." Gail felt a fresh wave of anxiety wash over her, but she kept her gaze down, trying to stay calm. Just then, a tall, broad-shouldered man from a few rows back stood up and walked purposefully towards them. His presence commanded attention, and the murmurs in the cabin quieted. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice firm and calm. "I couldn't help but overhear. Is there a problem here?" Eric looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you supposed to be?" The man crossed his arms, his posture resolute. "My name is David. I'm a passenger just like you, and I think we all deserve to travel without this kind of disruption." Gail looked up, her eyes meeting David's. Relief flooded through her at the sight of an ally. Jasmine turned in her seat, her face lighting up with hope. David took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "Not when it involves harassing others. We're all here to get to our destination peacefully. Your behavior is unacceptable." A ripple of agreement swept through the nearby passengers. A woman nodded vigorously, and a man across the aisle muttered his support. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted, solidarity replacing the previous tension. The flight attendant, who had intervened earlier, reappeared, accompanied by another crew member. She approached the group with a determined look. "Is there a further issue here?" she asked, addressing David and Eric. David nodded towards Eric. "This man has been making inappropriate and offensive comments towards this lady and her daughter. It needs to stop." The flight attendant turned to Eric, her expression firm. "Sir, this is your final warning. Any further disturbances and we will take serious action, which could include involving the authorities upon landing." Eric's face flushed with anger, but he remained silent, slumping back in his seat. The flight attendant gave a nod to David, then addressed the passengers around. "We appreciate your cooperation. Please, let's all try to have a peaceful flight from here on out." As the flight attendants moved away, David looked down at Gail and Jasmine. "Are you two all right?" he asked gently. Gail managed a small smile, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We are now, thank you. I appreciate your help." Jasmine nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, David. It means a lot." David returned to his seat, the cabin quieting once more. The tension that had gripped the passengers eased, replaced by a sense of communal support. Gail took a deep breath, the relief washing over her. She reached out and squeezed Jasmine's hand, a silent exchange of strength and reassurance. As the flight continued, the rest of the journey passed without incident. Eric remained subdued, his earlier aggression quelled by the collective disapproval of those around him. Gail found herself glancing occasionally at David, silently thankful for his intervention. His actions had not only protected them, but had also restored a sense of safety and dignity to the journey. Jasmine, though still alert, relaxed into her seat, comforted by the solidarity of the passengers. She knew that the confrontation had brought out the best in people, revealing the strength of unity in the face of adversity. As they began their descent into London, Gail looked out the window, the city's lights twinkling below. She felt a renewed sense of hope and gratitude. The flight had been challenging, but it had also shown her the power of standing together against injustice. As the plane landed at Heathrow and the passengers disembarked, Gail and Jasmine felt the weight of the journey lift slightly. However, the unease from the incident still lingered in their hearts. They walked through the terminal, their minds preoccupied with the events of the flight. Unbeknownst to them, David had uploaded a video of the confrontation. The clip, showing Eric's offensive remarks and the subsequent support from fellow passengers, quickly gained traction. Within hours, it had gone viral, sparking outrage across social media platforms. By the time Gail and Jasmine reached the baggage claim, their phones were buzzing incessantly. Messages of support poured in from friends and strangers alike, expressing solidarity and outrage over what they had endured. At the arrivals area, a group of airline representatives approached them. The lead representative, a woman with a composed demeanor, stepped forward. Miss Carter, I'm Samantha from the airline. We deeply regret the incident that occurred during your flight. Please follow us. We'd like to discuss this matter further." Gail and Jasmine exchanged a wary glance, but followed Samantha to a quieter part of the terminal where a few journalists had already gathered. Cameras flashed and microphones were thrust towards them. "Mrs. Carter, can you tell us what happened on the flight?" one reporter asked. Gail took a deep breath, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "We were subjected to racist remarks by a fellow passenger. It was a painful experience, but the support from others on the flight showed us that people are willing to stand up against such behavior." Jasmine added, "It's important that the airline takes these incidents seriously. Moving us was not the solution. We need real actions to ensure this doesn't happen again." The airline representative nodded solemnly. "We are conducting a thorough investigation and will take appropriate actions. We sincerely apologize for the distress this caused." David, who had followed them from the plane, stepped forward. "I posted the video because people need to see what happened. This kind of behavior should not be tolerated anywhere." Gail looked at David, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you for standing up for us and sharing our story." As the initial media frenzy subsided, Gail and Jasmine were escorted to a private lounge where they could finally sit, and process what had happened. They checked their phones again, seeing hashtags like Justice for Gail trending, with thousands of people expressing their support and calling for the airline to take action. "I can't believe how quickly this spread," Jasmine said, scrolling through the messages. Gail nodded, her eyes misty. "It's overwhelming, but it's also comforting to know so many people care." Meanwhile, the airline's PR team was working tirelessly to manage the fallout. Statements were issued and promises were made to address the incident thoroughly. However, the public was not easily placated. Demands for accountability and systemic changes in handling such incidents continued to grow. As they sat together, Gail and Jasmine reflected on the power of collective voices. What had started as a painful, isolating experience on a flight had transformed into a powerful movement for justice and change. They knew the journey ahead would be challenging, but with the support of the public and allies like David, they felt a renewed sense of strength and purpose. "Mum, we're not alone in this," Jasmine said, her voice firm. "People are with us. We can make a difference." Gail squeezed her daughter's hand, a determined smile forming on her lips. "Yes, we can, and we will." As they left the airport, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over London. The day had been long and arduous, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where their voices and those of countless others would continue to rise against injustice, shining a light on the path towards a more just and compassionate world. Gail sat at her kitchen table, the early morning light casting a soft glow through the window. She sipped her tea, feeling the weight of the recent events pressing down on her. Across from her, Jasmine was focused on her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys as she responded to countless messages of support. "We need to keep up the momentum," Jasmine said, looking up. "People are rallying behind us, Mum. We can't let this opportunity slip away." Gail nodded, her determination mingling with exhaustion. "I know, sweetheart. It's just so overwhelming." A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Jasmine got up to answer it, revealing Ms. Thompson, their civil rights lawyer. She stepped inside, her demeanor professional yet warm. "Good morning, Gail, Jasmine," Ms. Thompson greeted them. "I understand how challenging this is for both of you, but we're going to turn this into a fight for justice." Gail smiled weakly. "Thank you for being here, Ms. Thompson. We really need your help." Ms. Thompson sat down and opened her briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents. "First, we need to gather all the evidence we can. The video that went viral is a strong piece of evidence, but we need more. Witness statements, any other recordings, and detailed accounts from both of you." Jasmine nodded, her resolve clear. "I've already reached out to some of the passengers who expressed support. They're willing to give statements." "Excellent," Ms. Thompson replied. "We'll need their contact information. The more corroborating evidence we have, the stronger our case will be." Gail took a deep breath, feeling the strain of reliving the incident. "It's hard to go through all this again, but I know it's necessary." Ms. Thompson reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Gail's. "I understand. Take it one step at a time. We're in this together." As they worked through the morning, the sense of purpose helped Gail push through her fatigue. Jasmine's unwavering support and Ms. Thompson's expertise gave her the strength to keep going. By the afternoon, they had compiled a substantial amount of evidence. Ms. Thompson looked over the materials, her expression thoughtful. "This is a good start. I'll draft the initial complaint and file it with the court. We also need to prepare for the possibility of a settlement offer, but our goal is to hold Eric accountable and set a precedent." Gail nodded, her eyes showing a mix of determination and apprehension. We want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Jasmine added, and we want the airline to change their policies. Moving us wasn't the right solution. They need to handle these situations better. Ms. Thompson smiled. Absolutely. We'll push for policy changes as part of our demands. Now let's talk about the next steps. As they continued their discussion, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was a group of local activists and community leaders who had come to show their support. They brought food, legal resources, and more messages of encouragement. "We're with you," one of the activists said, handing Gail a bundle of handwritten notes. "The community stands behind you." Gail felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the support. "Thank you all so much. It means more than I can say." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity and planning. By evening, Gail and Jasmine were exhausted, but buoyed by the solidarity of their community. As they prepared for bed, Jasmine turned to her mother. "Mum, we're doing the right thing. This fight is bigger than us." Gail nodded, hugging her daughter tightly. "I know, Jasmine, and with everyone behind us, I believe we can make a difference." As they turned out the lights, a sense of hope filled the room. The road ahead would be tough, but they were ready to face it together, bolstered by the strength of their community and the promise of justice. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as people filed in, eager to witness the highly publicized trial. Gail and Jasmine sat side by side at the plaintiff's table, their lawyer, Ms. Thompson, beside them. Across the room, Eric sat with his lawyer, looking visibly tense. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. The judge, a stern yet fair-looking woman, surveyed the room. "We will begin with the opening statements. Ms. Thompson, you may proceed." Ms. Thompson stood, her presence commanding attention. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we are here to seek justice for my clients, Gail and Jasmine Carter, who were subjected to unprovoked racial harassment by the defendant, Eric. We have compelling evidence, including witness testimonies and a video that went viral showing the extent of the defendant's behavior. We seek not only accountability, but also a precedent to deter such actions in the future." Eric's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man with a confident demeanor, rose next. "Your Honor, members of the jury, my client is being unfairly portrayed based on a misunderstanding. We believe that when all the facts are presented, you will see that this was an isolated incident blown out of proportion by social media." The judge nodded, signaling the start of the evidentiary phase. "Ms. Thompson, you may call your first witness." Ms. Thompson called David to the stand. He recounted the incident on the flight, detailing Eric's remarks and the collective discomfort among passengers. "I felt compelled to record the incident because such behavior should not go unchecked," David concluded, his voice steady. Ms. Thompson then played the video for the court. The room was silent, save for the murmurs of disapproval as Eric's comments filled the air. Gail and Jasmine held hands tightly, their faces showing a mix of pain and resolve. Next, Ms. Thompson called other passengers who had witnessed the incident. Each provided consistent testimonies supporting Gail and Jasmine's account. One passenger, a middle-aged woman, testified, "It was clear to everyone on that flight that Eric's comments were racially charged and deeply offensive." The judge looked towards Eric's lawyer. "Your turn to cross-examine." Eric's lawyer approached David. "Mr. David, you said you felt compelled to record the incident. Isn't it possible that you were influenced by the current social climate to view my client's actions in the worst possible light?" David shook his head. "No. What I witnessed was blatant racism. I recorded it to ensure there was evidence of what happened. The lawyer's attempts to undermine David's credibility fell flat. Turning to Gail, he asked, "Mrs. Carter, isn't it true that you might have misinterpreted my client's frustration as racism?" Gail, her voice clear and unwavering, replied, "No, it was unmistakable." His words and actions left no room for misinterpretation. When it was Eric's turn to testify, he fumbled under Ms. Thompson's cross-examination. I was just having a bad day," he stammered. "I didn't mean anything by it." Ms. Thompson's voice was calm but firm. "Mr. Eric, the video and testimonies clearly show repeated targeted comments. Are you saying that everyone, including yourself, misunderstood your intentions?" Eric's face flushed. I guess I didn't think it through." The judge observed the interaction closely, noting Eric's inconsistent and weak defense. After closing arguments, where Ms. Thompson emphasized the importance of accountability and Eric's lawyer reiterated their stance of misunderstanding, the judge called a recess. Gail and Jasmine waited anxiously. "We've done all we can," Ms. Thompson reassured them. "The evidence speaks for itself." The courtroom was filled with an anticipatory hush as the judge re-entered and took her seat. Gail and Jasmine held hands tightly, their hearts pounding in unison. The judge surveyed the room, her expression solemn and composed. "After reviewing all evidence and testimonies," she began, her voice clear and authoritative, "it is the judgment of this court that the defendant Eric is found liable for racial harassment against the plaintiffs Gail and Jasmine Carter." A murmur of approval swept through the room, but the judge's voice cut through it. "The defendant is hereby ordered to pay compensatory damages to the plaintiffs. Furthermore, the court strongly recommends that the airline revises its policies to better handle and prevent such incidents in the future." Gail felt a surge of relief and validation while Jasmine squeezed her mother's hand, tears of triumph glistening in her eyes. They had won. As the courtroom buzzed with reaction, the judge continued, "This ruling is not just about compensation. It serves as a reminder that racial harassment will not be tolerated and that justice must be served." Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, holding signs of support and chanting slogans of unity. The media was out in full force, cameras and microphones ready to capture every moment. Gail and Jasmine stepped outside, greeted by a wave of applause. David, their staunch supporter, stood nearby, his face beaming with pride. He had helped galvanize public support, and now he was here to witness the victory. A reporter pushed forward, microphone in hand. "Gail, Jasmine, how do you feel about the verdict?" Gail took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the emotion. "We are relieved and grateful for this outcome. This verdict is not just for us, but for everyone who has faced similar injustices. It's a step towards a more just and equitable society." Jasmine added, "This victory shows that standing up against racism is essential. We hope this case encourages others to speak out and demand change." The crowd erupted in cheers, and more reporters shouted questions. Another asked, "What do you hope will come from this case?" Gail paused, considering her words carefully. "We hope that this case leads to better policies and training for handling racial incidents, not just in airlines, but in all public spaces. Everyone deserves to travel, work, and live without fear of harassment or discrimination." As the media frenzy continued, a representative from the airline approached them, looking earnest. "Mrs. Carter, Miss Carter, we want to extend our deepest apologies for what you experienced. We are committed to making significant changes and would like to work with you to ensure this never happens again." Gail nodded, appreciating the gesture. "We look forward to seeing those changes." It's time for real action. As the crowd began to disperse, Gail and Jasmine stood together, feeling the weight of their victory. It was a moment of triumph, but also a reminder of the long road ahead. They knew this case was just one battle in a much larger fight against racism and injustice. David joined them, his face serious. This is a huge win, but we have to keep pushing. This can't be the end. Jasmine nodded. Absolutely. This is just the beginning. We have to keep the momentum going. The evening light streamed through the living room window, casting a warm glow on Gail and Jasmine as they sat together on the couch. "Mum, how do you feel about everything now?" Jasmine asked, her voice soft but curious. Gail sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Relieved, mostly." Jasmine nodded, understanding the weight of her mother's words. "I know, but we've taken a big step, and seeing so many people support us, it gives me hope." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Jasmine got up to answer it, finding a mail carrier with a letter in hand. She thanked him and brought the letter to her mother. "It's from Eric," she said, handing it over with a mix of curiosity and caution. Gail opened the letter, her hands trembling slightly. She read it aloud, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Dear Gail and Jasmine, I am writing to you to express my deepest apologies for my actions. I have spent these past weeks reflecting on my behavior and the pain I caused. There are no excuses for what I did, and I am truly sorry. I am committed to changing and making amends. If you are willing, I would like to meet and apologize in person. Sincerely, Eric." Silence filled the room as they absorbed the words. Jasmine's face was a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Do you think he's sincere?" Gail folded the letter carefully. I don't know, but I believe in giving people a chance to make things right." "What do you think?" Jasmine considered this, then nodded. "If you're willing to hear him out, then I am too." They reached out to Eric and arranged to meet at a local cafe. The day of the meeting, they arrived early, both feeling a mixture of nervousness and resolve. Eric was already there, looking anxious and remorseful. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Eric said as they sat down. His voice was quiet, his eyes earnest. Gail nodded, her expression serious but open. "We're here to listen." Eric took a deep breath. "I'm deeply sorry for what I did. I was ignorant and hurtful, and I've spent every day since trying to understand why I acted that way. I've started attending sensitivity training and working with community groups to educate myself and help others." Jasmine listened intently, her gaze steady. "We appreciate your apology, Eric, but words need to be backed by actions." "I understand," Eric replied, his voice filled with sincerity. "I want to prove that I've changed. I know it will take time, but I am committed to doing the work." Gail leaned forward, her eyes softening slightly. "Forgiveness is a journey, Eric. We can't just forget what happened, but we can choose to move forward." The conversation continued, touching on their experiences and hopes for the future. As they talked, the initial tension began to ease, replaced by a tentative sense of understanding. By the end of their meeting, they had laid the groundwork for reconciliation. It wasn't an easy process, but it was a start. Gail and Jasmine left the cafe feeling lighter, knowing they had taken a step towards healing, not just for themselves, but also for Eric. Back at home, Gail and Jasmine sat together once more, reflecting on the day. "I think we did the right thing," Gail said softly. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it allows us to move forward." Jasmine nodded, her heart filled with a sense of peace. And maybe, just maybe, this can lead to real change. The years following the trial had been transformative for Gail, Jasmine, and Eric. Their lives had taken different paths, yet remained intertwined by the shared experience that had changed them all. Gail stood in front of a room filled with students, her voice steady and passionate. "Racial justice is not just a fight for today. It's a lifelong commitment," she said, her eyes scanning the eager faces. She had become a prominent speaker and activist, dedicating her time to educating others about the importance of equality and respect. After her lecture, a young woman approached her. "Mrs. Carter, your story inspired me to start a diversity initiative at my school. Thank you for your courage." Gail smiled warmly, her heart swelling with pride. "Thank you for taking action. Every effort counts." Meanwhile, Jasmine was leading a community meeting at the local center. She had channeled her energy into grassroots organizing, working tirelessly to create inclusive spaces and support systems for marginalized groups. Her leadership had earned her the respect and admiration of many. "Today we're launching a mentorship program for young activists," Jasmine announced to the group. "Together, we can continue to build a stronger, more inclusive community." The room erupted in applause, and Jasmine felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The work was challenging, but the impact was undeniable. In another part of town, Eric was speaking at a workshop on racial sensitivity. His journey had been one of profound change and redemption. After the trial, he had immersed himself in learning and activism, determined to make amends for his past actions. "I used to be part of the problem," Eric admitted to the audience, "but I chose to educate myself and work towards being part of the solution. It's never too late to change and do the right thing." The participants listened intently, many of them moved by Eric's honesty and commitment. His efforts had not gone unnoticed, and he had become a respected figure in the fight against racism. One evening, Gail and Jasmine invited Eric to their home for dinner. It was a symbol of the reconciliation and mutual respect that had grown between them. As they sat around the table, sharing stories and laughter, the atmosphere was warm and relaxed. "I'm grateful for this second chance," Eric said, his voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for believing in my ability to change." Gail reached out and placed a hand on his. "We all have the capacity to grow and make a difference. Your journey is proof of that." Jasmine nodded in agreement. "It's about moving forward together, learning from the past and striving for a better future." As the evening drew to a close, they stood on the porch, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, a beautiful end to a meaningful day. The journey that had begun with pain and conflict had transformed into one of understanding, growth, and unwavering commitment to justice. Gail, Jasmine, and Eric knew that their efforts were part of a larger movement, one that required continuous dedication and action. As they faced the future, they did so with a renewed sense of hope and unity, ready to continue their work in making the world a more just and compassionate place for all.